made a personal effort to get around to half of them. No, well, many, but continue to do that week by week. I'm trying to get out to see some of our team, a local area nonprofit, and a local area for-profit, and it's just wonderful to see some of the ecosystem at work. Just wanted to say this. I guess this portion is my remarks. I did want to say to my fellow colleagues, I've worked with all of you. I really look forward to working with you ahead, both on this commission, but also generally at the county. Thanks for your leadership, and honored to work with you. And everybody in the rows here, thanks for what you do. Paul's given me a couple of remarks. Some of these were for my edification, but I'm going to share them back with you, particularly for some of the members of the audience and our newest member, Mayor Kraus. Just a quick background around the commission. We prepare and present an annual proposed 5-year economic development plan for Cuyahoga County. Fortunately for me, coming in, the playbook has been written by you guys from last year, but I think that there's always opportunity to iterate interim and not just make this a 5-year chartered endeavor, but to really work on the in-between years, because as we know, our economy changes quickly and we want to stay up to date. So I would say in a 5-year plan, let's keep revisiting it like we're going to do later today. But again, officially, we've got a 5-year economic development plan for, again, today's review. And this plan identifies development opportunities, among other things, to be carried out here in Cuyahoga County with our partners in public, nonprofit, and private agencies. Commission's goal is to enhance prosperity and well-being of this county through innovative development strategies and initiatives. I also, looking out to Beju Shaw and others, you guys know that the ecosystem of our economic development is much broader than just Cuyahoga County. So we look forward to reaching out to the counties adjacent beyond about that. I'll just give you one anecdote. Seeing what's happening with Intel in Licking County, but learning how many of our companies are in their prospective supply chain, seeing a company in Richmond Heights just last week that is in that supply chain as a prospect, another one in Strongsville. It's exciting to see that we have, I think, the ecosystem is much broader than just this single county, but our county is very robust in terms of developing the nucleus of the ecosystem. So the commission itself, you've been referred to as Blue Ribbon Commission. We appreciate your blue ribbon work, and there's an opportunity to do a lot more with our economic development plan. The plan that before us is 2021 to 2025. The update of the economic development plan was based on the county's 2020 COVID-19 recovery plan. Again, things change and move fast, so we may have to continue to iterate on that plan, but we've got the baseline. And again, in the COVID-19 recovery planning strategies, some of the precepts were to really immediately address the immediate triage of needs with the 1-year immediate focus, continue investment and support of small minority businesses and residents. I'm looking out at just one business who's going to present later today, Sean Watterson, but I know you've got a conversation that you're going to have with us about hospitality, but what you did as a small business through pandemic was remarkable, and coming through it is remarkable, and I know there was some downtime, but visiting your place last week, feeling that you are in that recovery path, it's really redeeming. So kudos to all of our businesses, small and mid and large, but for getting through and persevering. We will continue our growth initiatives and continue to market Cuyahoga County locally and nationally. I was just with a business owner at lunch today who said we ought to be spending time in the Ohio colleges. Quentin, you'll appreciate this. He said we should go down to Miami of Ohio and we should market Cleveland, Ohio, and we should find out what the diff between Chicago and Cleveland is for that student and make up the diff. He suggested a month of rent as an inducement. That's just something I thought was interesting, but people are in the game of attracting to Cleveland. I bring up Quentin because his son just graduated from Miami of Ohio and came back to Cleveland. Okay, so on the 2021 adjustments to the fiscal economic development plan, some of the things we're going to oversee today is water resources, the microgrid, lakefront access, things that Cuyahoga County has been doing to help our businesses remain competitive. And again, supporting our major cultural assets, our sports assets, our commitment to equity zones, closing the digital divide, and no pun intended, jumpstarting innovation with partners like Jumpstart and access to the state's Ohio Third Frontier program and local funding. and tech startups. So that's just an overview of some of the ongoing work of Cuyahoga County. Again, happy to have been handed that to some degree by you, Director Hertig, and our partners and my predecessors. And I'm just going to say it's going to be great working with you guys. So let me go to what's next on our agenda before Vice Chair Schron gets here, and we can bring up our partners for early stage investment resources and needs for their report. We welcome Jay Berner-Crew, Todd Fetterman, and Ray Leach.
And Chris, we've allowed quite a bit of time for discussion as well.
Great.
So we're hopeful that
Yeah.
in addition to speech, there'll be discussion.
Come on up. Berner.
Well, good to see both of you again. I feel like you said, in front of friends. So,
Visited you twice over the last year and a half, small business we visited. Thank you, Berner.
yeah, I usually don't need those, but okay. Bottom line, I got a call from Teleange, and she asked me just to come in. I said, well, how should I prepare? She said, just come in and tell your story, right? And so I see my esteemed, the chair of my board, Mark Burns is not here, but at least I see his name. I got to tell you that first, I'm very thankful I can have this opportunity to share with you in such an intimate forum what our story really is. We're a $60 million early stage A-series venture fund. And I started Nirvana back in 2008 after 35 years in the capital markets. I retired and started Nirvana. We manage assets, and as well, we write surety bonds for banks to take in public deposits. Then we started funding early stage companies. We saw a target-rich environment here in this ecosystem, primarily healthcare. We did a turnaround situation for Mo Vaughn and Mo Vaughn Transport. He was able to get out of that with a reasonable profit. But we started doing business in the healthcare space. And when you start doing your homework, you see that the healthcare space is the #1 supplier of jobs, especially the high-paying jobs in our community. I'm going to tell you a little story as to why we did this, but I want to hear from the group as to how we should take that next step as well. So I want to give the basics, $60 million. We should be looking at anywhere from 18 to 23 companies to fund over a 4-year period of time. And I think that we all know that Cleveland does in Cuyahoga County, Northeast Ohio, does a great job of early stage, pre-seed funding of our early stage companies. You have many options. I don't want to get into who is doing what, but we've done an excellent job in comparison to, or on a relative basis, to other communities of our size. However, those communities also noticed what we were doing here. So think about it. We're doing early stage funding. We're trying to raise capital anywhere from $2 to $5 million on an A round. We actually were successful with IAI, which is now Lazurite. They're still here in town. We did True, which is a negative pressure wound healing. They're still here in town, and they just went back on the market for $450 million exit. Let's all pray that they get that amount. But we saw this phenomena of great funding on the early stage, but our companies were exiting. And they were exiting at that A and B round level. And we couldn't figure out, we actually raised $3 million for a company. We called the CEO and we said, we put it in escrow. We said, come on down and you have access to this capital. He came down to the office and he said, Berner, I really appreciate you raising this money. He said, but I have a term sheet from Austin, Texas. And it was a one-pager. The only term that meant anything is that they had to, within 48 hours, move their headquarters to Austin, Texas. It wasn't the first time we had seen Austin in our market. We saw San Antonio here, we saw Boston here, and they were targeting our early stage medical device, 510K. They understood the length of time it took and the funding that it took to get past the FDA. And they were targeting that. So I don't know how many of you know Bob Smith, but I picked up the phone. I said, Bob, what is this? I mean, this is a phenomenon we're seeing, and it's really causing some pain in our community. So talking with Bob, he said, hey, it's a strategy that other cities use. But then we have to ask ourselves, what are we not doing here that allows them to accept those term sheets? Because like you say, when you look at it, our cost of living, if you enjoy the seasons, I happen to enjoy the seasons, I grew up here. Our cost of living, our quality of life, we have the sporting teams covered. What is it that would allow someone to leave? And it came down to economics. Gentlemen, the one message I want to leave you with today is that we have to be intentional about what we're doing with our early stage companies. Manufacturing Works is doing some things on the back end. We're very excited about forming that partnership, but the nuts and bolts of what keeps a community strong is when you have those, and we were just down in Franklin County this morning, looking at best practices at our neighbor, but you must be intentional about funding and making capital available, reasonable cost of capital available for your early stage companies. Now they have to raise their hand and they have to come forward in the classroom, but I can at least say we're being targeted. Now, if we're being targeted, someone's done their homework. And so my message today is that doing it through venture, where's Ray? I went down and I talked to Ray before I started this journey. And he told me, he said, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Ray, you were right. It is the hardest thing I've ever done in the capital markets, but it's doable. And it will help solve a problem. Jumpstart has done a great job of laying the foundation. They've raised the level of awareness. Our young people think like entrepreneurs now. They're not necessarily looking out for that new job out of college. They're looking to start that new idea. So there is a major shift in our young postgraduate employment base. They're looking to be entrepreneurs. So, healthcare. Why do I think healthcare is so important? Number one, if you look at any table, it shows you that the high-paying jobs in our community are primarily concentrated in the healthcare space. That's just a fact. And if we don't address, and this is what gave me the energy and the vision to start Nirvana Healthcare Ventures. And I knew that it was going to be a heavy lift because I talked to Ray. I figured he knew a little bit about it. So I said, I have to put together an all-star team. Anytime you get a heavy lift, you better have great partners. And so Mark is the head of our advisory board. I think most of you know Dr. Frank Pepe. He's the one that did the first face transplant. He's a partner. Dr. Raymond Rackley, world-renowned urologist. He's a partner. Dr. Mark Penn, cardiologist, Cleveland Heart Lab. He had an exit. He's a partner. And we've recently convinced Toby Cosgrove to join our team. And it was amazing when we first talked to Toby, how his story almost mimicked where we are today. He was aware of this back in the early 2000s, and he actually tried to get his people to go out into the community, come back with great ideas. Now, we're targeting the Midwest. It's important that we do a great job here in our own backyard because, you know, it's like baseball. You can't win in your own division. Your chances of advancing to the playoff round is very slim. You have to dominate in your own backyard. So we intend to collaborate and work with our strategic partners. And that's also very important as to where the ecosystem here is in Cleveland. We need to be talking to each other. We need to be doing more of this, and we need to be de-risking early stage companies, because early stage companies disproportionately, that's where you get your jobs. If you want high paying jobs, you've got to pay attention to the high paying job creators. So that's my message today. I don't want to make this a one-way conversation. What I wanted to hear was, one of the things that we hear a lot is that we don't do first-time funds. And then I look at my team, and I say to myself, boy, this is not a first-time fund team. I've been doing it for, 15 years, raising capital. I understand. I did it through Reg D, which is, I did the full round and wrote the check to the entrepreneur at the end of the raise. But having capital to deploy through a fund structure is clearly just as important. It's another option. We still do the A round and B round for early stage companies. Don't get me wrong, we're not exiting that market. We're just bringing a new tool to the toolbox. And we want support, but we also want collaboration. We want to talk and learn from each other, because when you look at other cities, you look at other economic ecosystems, disproportionately we lack in the A and B round. And some folks, like in Austin and in San Antonio and in Boston, they have figured out how to best grow their economies the way they've designed them. It's intentional. Talked to a gentleman from a firm out on the West Coast. Christmas was the name of the fund. And he was saying how they studied the Midwest. We have better values here. So when you sit down and you look at an early stage company, one of the most important things is how you establish the valuation. Now, the entrepreneur thinks it's worth 20 million. But in reality, when you look at it, it might be only worth 5. But other communities have identified the Midwest as a very fertile hunting ground. And we have academia here. In the Midwest, we have tremendous leverage with the educational or academic systems that we bring to bear. Case. I'd like to tell you that University of Michigan is in the game, but I don't know how many people I'd piss off by saying that. But they're definitely in the game. They are committed to the game. Ann Arbor is a hotbed of activity, and that's in the Midwest. But when you go to the coast, or we're going to Chicago next week, they're anxious to see us. They want us to come, and they want to interact with us, because guess what? They understand what this means to a community. It is important. It is something that I think we should all get excited about. Ray, I feel your pain from all these years of telling this story, but it is so critical to our community moving forward with those high-paying jobs. And when you ask, why don't our young people come back here like his son did? So I think when you all step away from it and you're honest with yourselves, a lot of it has to do about your compensation for your time, right? So you want high-paying jobs, you want quality jobs, and you want them in areas where your community's good at it already. De-risk the model. Any questions? Because I want to ask some questions of you, but I'll wait for you to ask a few questions of me as well.
Alex?
Any?
When you talked about the anecdote about Austin luring away a company.
Yes.
And you said it was economics. You mean what they offered was better than what we offered?
What they offered was first, we raised 2.2 million. They came in at 3. We were asking for a 3% participation in equity. They didn't ask for that. It was, what was really amazing about that, and there were 2 companies, so I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit between the 2. But what was clearly somewhat bothersome, number one, that when you signed the documents, you had to move your headquarters. I thought that was wickedly smart. It does a lot of things downstream. But I think what they did from an economic standpoint that made a difference was that they talked about the support they could get for housing. They were working with the community, and it was a holistic approach. I can only tell you that we work in silos. Not being critical, just being honest with you. We typically work in this area, we work just as hard as any other community, but we work in silos. And we have some rigid guideposts from the past that we need to talk about modifying, because it's really the outcome that we're driving to. I'm an econometrics major. I look at the numbers. I believe that what makes a difference is when I can talk to O'Brien about companies that he sees outside of our community, the value he's seeing, the capital support he's getting. I want to talk about the metrics around the opportunity, because when they make a decision, and a young person makes a decision, they're not making the decision in the moment. They're making a decision where they're going to raise their family, what school they're going to send their children to. We have all of that. We have that I grew up in Shaker. I'm so proud of that community for some of the cutting edge things they've done to balance mission and environment. And not all of it's been good, right? Some things they failed, but they tried. I think that's the most important thing I want to share with you today. We need to be more collaborative. I'll tell you one, because they're the host, I'll pick on Jumpstart a little bit. In the beginning, I didn't want to work with Jumpstart. I felt like that model is a model that I can't manage. I don't quite understand it. But after I talked to Mark said, hey, look, go down and talk to Ray. He's a wealth of knowledge. And I'm standing here today telling you, I'm so glad I did, because at least he told me how hard it was going to be. But it is something that we have to pick up the mantle and we have to lead. And I stepped out there not having much in the way of understanding the venture space. I just said, I'm going to learn. And what I can't learn, I'll actually find partners. I'll collaborate. I'll talk to people. I'll educate my system as best I can based on people that have already been there and done that. So any other questions that you may have of me? Because I do want to ask. I do. I have
A couple questions of us. By the way, our Chief of Staff, Eric Wobser, came in to listen in. So
good.
Please.
So my question is, when you look at the statistics and you see that first-time funds typically outperform the existing funds 2, 3, 4, 5 down the road, what is the hesitance for working with a first-time fund? Baiju, I'm looking at you because maybe you probably know a little more.
I can't speak to obviously what various investment managers and asset managers think. I think there's a lot in what you say that obviously I'm very familiar with, right? In Cleveland, but also across the Midwest, right? If outside of the two coasts and Texas, you really don't have a venture market. You have, efforts, good efforts, but you don't have a well-developed, well-capitalized market, even in places like Chicago. It's not a venture town. What's interesting to me your statement is accurate. First-time funds tend to outperform because it gets back to those investment managers are hungry. They're working it in a way that, established funds sometimes can get a little soft and rest on their laurels. I think our challenge in our community is it's not that we don't have risk capital here. We have an incredibly wealthy community. The depth of wealth here, and this is not historic wealth, it's present wealth as well as historic wealth. It's a very, very wealthy community. And it's a risk-favoring community, but it's a risk-favoring community into assets that they understand, like real estate. It's into private equity funds, right? We are a very deep private equity community, but we're not a venture community. And I think that I don't have an answer to you in terms of like how do we change the psyche of the gatekeepers around it, other than saying we need to do a better job of playing on the fear of missing out. Right? We do a terrible job as a community of talking about our successes and how much money was made by those that actually took the risk.
Right.
Right? We need to start to catalyze a little FOMO among these asset managers and among our high net worth individuals to say, if I don't look at the next opportunity or the next fund, I might not get the return that my, colleague just did. And that's something we need to do a much better job of storytelling around.
Good input. Anybody else?
I just had
Yep, sure.
two questions. One is, how involved are our existing business all throughout the region, whether it's in this effort? And then my second question would be, the one thing my daughter was concerned about moving from Boston was when she was in Boston, she said she felt, like at home.
Sure.
With all the young people. And she was concerned about whether or not there was a young professional ecosystem in Cleveland.
Right.
And she still hasn't figured it out being here. So, is that being grown, a young professional ecosystem like on the coast?
So I have a partial answer. I can tell you that I'm seeing the pockets. I realize that the majority of, I was over in the Airview Tower for years. And, the development that went on around us, you could tell, especially in the morning when folks were out before the start of the workday, many of those people were very young. Many of the indigenous population in downtown Cleveland, which has struggled, but it's primarily our young people. I've always said I thought Cleveland was a great metro area if we could just get the housing to support the rest of the businesses, and that's happening. It's not happening at the pace that we would like to see, but I think having affordable housing in your downtown area, young people that like Cleveland State. So in my lifetime, Cleveland State is a game changer. Brought building out those dorms, building out the residential space has been a game changer, but that's a pocket. That's a pocket that is just, east of Playhouse Square. You can begin to see the impact they're having on just the activity we're seeing at Playhouse Square. There's another pocket that's in the near west side, West 25th. That market is starting, and it's our young people. It's the guys that don't want to drive 35, 40 minutes on the highway in the snow to get to their job. I don't know how COVID and the impact of working from home is going to, what the longevity of that cycle is, but clearly that has thrown a wrinkle into the equation. I just think we have to be intentional and continue to build out our residential areas in the downtown area, because that's where young people like to be. When I was living in New York, I liked Manhattan. When I got older, I liked New Jersey. But I think being within walking distance of those options that your daughter's looking for, that's going to happen best in downtown.
Well said, and Bern, I want to thank you. Just 2 points with interface with county. One, Mayor Bibb has said much about middle market housing, and I think we're going to try to match him in those efforts, both at City of Cleveland and beyond. Working with Beju and others, I think I'm just going to quip about what my colleague from Allegheny County, the Allegheny County executive, Rich Fitzgerald, said to me first of the year when I reached out to him about how Pittsburgh's been doing and how they've done it in some of the, I said, so how did you move the Three Rivers agenda so fast? And he said it was Carnegie Mellon, to your point. You know, it was research, it was tech jobs, it was people who wanted to be around an interesting place, and the real estate market followed. Just to me, it was a fascinating comment. Also just wanted to say to you, thanks for all you do, and we'll be following up more with you. And I'm joined by Councilman Jack Schron, who's going to chair the second half of this meeting. Personally, with the meeting, I've got to go City Hall and then on one other development agenda. I want to say to you guys that I personally miss, I want to catch back up with you about your presentations and what you're doing. But that was a great start. Thanks, Berner. All right, and so Jack, you get the back half.
Oh,
but
good.
let's have Todd Felderman come on up, and we are, Jack, in the middle of early stage investment resources and needs.
And I'm sorry about being late, but I was
You're fine.
working on an economic development issue.
All right, well, thank you and welcome. And this advances things, I imagine?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you for having me. In the spirit of a good conversation, a lot of back and forth, I'm going to go a little bit off-road here just to try to address a couple things on the fly. For background, I run North Coast Ventures. I've been doing this for 16 years. We invest in startups. I plan on doing it for another 16 years. It's not easy, probably is the hardest thing that I've ever been part of, trying to raise capital, deploy capital, help these companies be successful. But we've seen a lot of progress that is encouraging and a lot of challenges. Beju mentioned that outside of the coasts, San Francisco, New York, and Boston, there isn't a VC community. Although a couple places might argue with that, Denver and Austin, I think he's right. There certainly isn't a substantive one here. Unlike the area of focus, though, for Berner, though, North Coast Ventures is not terribly focused on traditional life sciences. So we no longer do medical devices, diagnostics, or therapeutics. We are better at other things. We looked at our first 10 years of operating, saw what we were better at, saw the resources we had, and really tried to focus. So because we are focused in a different area, we're going to have a different experience. So in a couple ways. One is that I can't remember us losing a company via term sheet. So companies don't leave Cleveland that are software companies traditionally because somebody gave them a term sheet. Money is fairly fungible. Most of them are not raising monstrous amounts. They do leave money, they do leave Cleveland rather, if they don't have enough talent. And I think that's the biggest issue. That's why some of the very best entrepreneurs may incubate an idea here and start it and scale it somewhere else. There are ecosystems that have other resources. Now in a post-COVID work from home, perhaps the ground has leveled just a little bit, but talent is the biggest issue we work with. To one of the comments before about being hard to raise a Series B here in Cleveland, it's partly because there are no Series B checks, because there are no Series B check writers, right? It just doesn't exist. I think you could argue there's barely Series A, right? We write some checks that are seven-figure checks. Jumpstart writes some seven-figure checks in the software technology space, but there are very few players that do. We're largely doing seed, seed plus, and then we want and need capital from across the country. So I don't know if anybody has seen Cranes today, but one of our portfolio companies, Vitalize, announced that they raised $100 million, which does not happen for a Cleveland-related company. I say related because we originally invested in a company called MedPilot. MedPilot merged with Vitalize. We kept investing at each stage, but this is a company now with $100 million in the bank and is going to do a lot of hiring. So part of the interest level I would have is how do we build on the 30 or so people that are here in Cleveland and try to use some of that capital and resources to see things built out here. So I'll tell you a little bit of the story of North Coast and what makes us different than most. So we invest purely in business software companies, healthcare IT, digital health, fintech, ed tech, and we approach those with a very active member base. So hardest thing I've ever done is probably go out and talk to 1,000 people over the past 16 years. 400 of them invested in the fund. one or more funds, I should say. They've invested as little as $50,000 in one of our funds, as much as $6 million. Believe there's many more $50,000, $100,000 check writers than there are 500 million, 2 million. Institutional venture capital is usually what VC is called, but an organization like ours doesn't have any institutions that have invested in it. So the $1 million check, the $6 million check, it came from individuals who believed in us, were willing to take a risk, and wanted to see what we're doing come to fruition. I think the two reasons people invest with us are, one, to make money. It's not charity. We are a purely for-profit fund. But the making money isn't enough because, as you mentioned, there's a very robust private equity community here. There are lots of resources. No one is saying, I've got $5 million I don't know what to do with, right? That's not a problem. So we've got to compete for that. We can compete with that with the results we've had to date, but we can also compete with that by saying, be part of this success story. And our investors get more intrinsic satisfaction and value when they get a 7X from an exit from OnShift than a 7X from buying Netflix at the right time, or some real estate portfolio that they don't know or see. Because at OnShift, there's over 250 people working a few blocks from here today. And maybe more importantly, we've invested in companies that have come out of the family tree of OnShift, right? So people who have worked there have gone on to start companies. You might be surprised to know that we've looked at and evaluated more startups that have come out of the OnShift family tree at 250, as we have Progressive, which has over 5,000 people, as we have Eaton or Sherwin or Parker Hannifin, because startups beget more startups. Big companies, even if there's tech around, don't tend to beget more companies. So our member investors are very active. Of the universe of people who have sold a technology-based company in Cleveland for $50 million or more, I'd say well over half are investors in our fund. But we also have people with industry expertise, functional expertise, because we know we don't have any more money than other investors, but what we do have is a network that we can leverage. So we're able at Progressive, for example, we have 7 senior executives at Progressive. So if we want to zero in and say, okay, we want to work on dynamic pricing around this specific area, we can find that right person. And that's a big asset for a portfolio company. So we greatly leverage the individual investors that have taken a risk on us and also volunteered that they want to be part of our success. They're willing to pick up the phone and be helpful. And we've seen those investors be responsive to us in this model in a way that we haven't seen them do for literally any other type of investment. There we go. Ooh, I'm going forward. Pardon my steering. Okay. So subset of our members, but a large number of people in the region who have invested, over 400 people. Our model is to bring in high quality deal flow, to use those investors to help us vet them, leverage their industry and functional expertise, and then have them help the companies once they're ultimately successful. So capital, connections, and expertise. In 16 years, we figured out how to do this at scale. We have a CRM system that we think is the country's most sophisticated database of investors in any geography that characterizes who knows who knows what, and who can be helpful to the portfolio. These are some of the logos that you all know. These are people who will pick up our phone, help us engage, and have been active with us. And this is really the secret weapon that I think a fund like ours has here in Cleveland, is our connection to and our willingness to reach out and call, and their willingness to react with us. These are just some of the examples where we've introduced a company and a customer has come out the other side. It is something that is more valuable to startups than money. They want our money for an investment. They would much rather get qualified introductions to high quality customers. This was just an example of how we characterized our investments. The companies on the right that we invested in, you see they're higher and to the right, those were the companies that were in market, that were commercializable, that we could actually help. The companies we couldn't help, where they were in clinical trials, they were in early development, those are on the left. We disproportionately lost when we didn't have an ability to leverage our network, and we disproportionately won when we had an ability to leverage it. These are some of the exits that we've had. As you'll see, many of these are modest exits, 20 million, 300 million, 50 million, 150 million. Part of the reason why we see so many companies that exit earlier is because that's what happens nationally. I don't think in our world anyway, that's not a Cleveland problem per se. Are there some companies that could raise more and could go on to grow? I'm sure, But the overwhelming majority of exits nationally in San Francisco and New York, for sure, are smaller exits because not all of them can grow up to be big companies. It defies the laws of physics. So over the past 16 years, we've co-invested with over 100 different venture capital funds, private equity funds, and angel groups. This is all money that's come into Cleveland. This is a drop in the bucket compared to the venture money that goes out, but the majority of the capital raised by our companies has come from out of state. We've deployed over $100 million into 75 different companies over the past 16 years, but this is crucial to growing companies. If we didn't have the ability to bring in capital from out of state, we wouldn't be in this business. So this was from a PwC study that showed the major venture hubs. You may notice that there's not a bubble in Cleveland. There's not a bubble in Ohio because, to Bijou's point, there is not enough of a community here. And that's something that we're trying to have an impact on, but something we're not going to change overnight, perhaps never, but we can have a much larger community than we have today. The way we're going to do that, though, is by getting larger amounts of capital from semi-institutional players. Funds like ours can only raise capital from 99 people. If the average investor puts in $500,000, that's a $50 million fund. So if your goal is to raise a $100 million fund, you have to have 99 people at an average of $1 million. We need to find a way to engage the corporate community, the foundation community, and to get them interested and excited about this space and to get them more comfortable with the risk profile, which is a little bit different than what perhaps they're used to. I won't go through the traditionals here. I'm going to skip a bunch of these slides, save a little more time for questions. But I'll note that big companies can and are developed here in Cleveland. This morning's news with Vitalize was a really nice example of that. There are plenty of companies here that have 50, 100, 200 or more. The problem is that we don't have companies that have 5,000, 10,000 in terms of tech. And hopefully some of these companies can grow up there, but we're never going to find out unless we can seed and grow more companies. With that, happy to take any questions you may have.
Anybody have any questions?
I've got a question.
Sure. William?
You mentioned the outflow of VC money from here versus inflow.
Yes.
Do you have order of magnitude on that?
Yes. So round numbers, if you look at the large institutions in Cleveland, the hospital systems, the universities, the foundations, the museums, the charitable foundations, there's well over $40 billion of capital. Rough estimates are that a quarter of that is in alternative assets, maybe 10% in venture, could be a little higher, a little lower, but rough numbers, $2 to $4 billion of Cleveland money is in venture funds somewhere other than Cleveland.
Yeah. So coast or global?
Pedro, did you have a question?
Todd, as you guys have obviously built a beautiful track record over time with lots of sweat and scars, are you starting to see interest from investors outside of Cleveland in not just co-investing in portfolio companies, but thinking about sort of as you continue to raise your funds, any bites from outside of Cleveland?
Slowly but surely, it's generally the extended Cleveland diaspora because you have to have an additional reason to want to be involved. I think it'll be another fund or two until we have those levels of track record to be able to show them. We have a couple people in Chicago, a couple people in Florida and in New York, but generally they have a Cleveland connection and tie, which isn't a bad thing. Brian?
Yeah, this is for you and probably for Berner also. When you think about the bubbles that you just showed and the places, Beju, where there is an ecosystem for venture, is most of it organic, or did somebody develop a system? Are there some elements that you see a region that said, hey, we're going to make a system happen, and here's what we did?
Yeah, so there are probably people in this room who've read more books on Silicon Valley and some of these ecosystems than I have. What I just say at a very high level is that there were some places that were unique places and times where things coalesced. They were all private. In some places there was some facilitation, very light, maybe in New York per se, where there's people wanted to be in New York. That I think helped it grow, but that's more technology oriented. The really big places just developed naturally. I can't think of many, and Ray would probably be the one to have it, if there are cities the size of Cleveland that have done this, but what I would say is when we started doing this, Cleveland was number one in Ohio. It'd probably go Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus. It's now Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland as far as technology startups.
Other questions? One of the things that we do have that, when you say Silicon Valley, obviously the chips got made there. I just watched a James Bond movie from 40 years ago where they were, if you remember that.
It's a good one.
It was a good one. I watched it last night. 80% of the chips in that movie were made in Silicon Valley. 80%. Now we have less than 12% in the entire United States. So that's kind of scary. But my question is, and I know Beiju is very familiar with it, there's not another city that can replicate what we have with 4 phenomenal hospital systems right here. We just created a diversion center from the county. There's not another body that has that. And my understanding is all 4 of those facilities have R&D and development inside that we're all paying for through our tax dollars in some respect. I mean, certainly the veterans one is. Certainly the Metro is being paid through taxpayer dollar. The other 2 are private are nonprofits. I'll put it in quotes, really big nonprofits. But why can't we somehow figure how to be the Silicon Valley around medical? And then once you figure it out around medical, somebody's got to make that stuff. And so in the same newspaper you read yesterday, Northeastern Ohio is by far the largest in manufacturing. There's not even another of the 88 counties that's even half the size of what we're contributing. So we've got the nucleus of doing a Silicon Valley around something that could be revolutionary. It seems to me you're in the medical community out there. Why can't we do that?
Well, I'll throw a couple things at you. So one is tech transfer is a big issue. There are some tech transfer organizations that hold on to what they have, others that would prefer to license it to others, and others that really want to seed startups, new companies that will go and run with this, maybe succeed, maybe they won't. In my experience, the entities that we have regionally tend to be in number 1 and number 2, don't tend to be heavy. Let's create a really easy way for entrepreneurs to access this technology, to take it, to run with it, and create it. So that's hard, right? Because hospitals don't build things, right? Typically, right? The invention comes there. It has to come somewhere else. And I might just say that in the current environment where software is so much of every aspect of business, that there's a great opportunity to leverage healthcare IT and digital health onto the platform that we have here in medical. So most of the medical companies we invest in have to do with one of the large secular trends that's happening in medicine. Maybe, because of COVID, telemedicine happened much more quickly. Partially because of COVID, also because of some just things in the system. There's a major crisis in healthcare staffing. Every hospital, the biggest issue they're working on is staffing. Baby boomers getting older and disproportionately taking services. The idea of fee-for-service shifting to value-based care. Those are all things that we have companies in our portfolio company addressing. So I would like to think that by driving more, I don't know if it's collaboration, engagement, but with some of these large institutions, that the technologists that want to start these companies, that want to work on problems with software where it's scalable, will get what they need most, which is customers and partners.
Yeah, I mean, there wouldn't be a bigger lab, theoretically, I think, in the country than these 4 hospital systems and our diversion center that you would have in Northeastern Ohio in regards to that. And of course, we all know that we've failed miserably at NASA's conversion of their technology. We've not had a single technology yet that's been deployed in Northeastern Ohio out of NASA, which is kind of sad, unfortunately. Thank you, Todd. Any other questions based on the chair's questions? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you very much, Todd.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would like to just add one point about.
You have to take the microphone. Sorry, we got to record you. Yeah, that's all right. It's we're a public body, and so when you get that kind of stuff, yeah.
No worries.
And you have to put your name on the record. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Burner Crew, I'm just, that's a great question. And one of the reasons is that the downstream supplier support that is needed is also not here. Minneapolis, which, when we look at Minneapolis and we say Cleveland versus Minneapolis, their weather is worse than ours, right? I mean, I would opt to live in Cleveland any day versus Minneapolis. But Minneapolis has a tremendous supplier support network so that when tight gauge instruments are needed, they have the quality of development, and that's a natural pull. And my team, we talk about the fact that we're in the midst of a huge repatriation of our supply lines onshore. We're as much as we would like to not think this is happening, but there's a part of our government that's going to war footing with China.
Absolutely.
China,
Sorry.
China is where the supplier networks are living today. That's 30 years of sending those companies to Asia. It's coming back here. And I think Cleveland might be a disproportionate recipient of some of that activity. But that's what we talk about in our shop. So I just wanted to.
I would like to think we're not going to be disproportionate. We're going to be proportionally what we should have gotten all along.
Really to the high side. By the
I
way.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. We are going to get our fair share because of manufacturing, which will then cooperate with the medical, I believe, out there. Ray, I think you're next up. Mr. Leach?
So we'll have him and Sean split the half hour,
Okay,
15 minutes each.
all right.
And I have some slides. So I'm going to try to tell a quick story, 20-year story in 10 minutes, hopefully, about the work that Jumpstart and Jumpstart Ventures has been working on. I did want to make sure to introduce my two cohorts, Jerry France and Hardik Desai. So Jerry's been with Jumpstart for almost 20 years, and Hardik's been with us for 11 years. And you'll see in a second with the slides we're going to share how important they are to the Jumpstart Ventures business. How we doing? So Berner, Todd, I guess probably the most important thing I would say to the two of you, and we've demonstrated it in various ways. Obviously, North Coast has been around a lot longer than Berner's fund is. Whatever Jumpstart can do to help you be successful, we will do. And any other venture fund or anyone else in the community that wants to make something happen around aggregating capital, Jumpstart's not a solo player. Everything we do in partnership. Certainly, Cuyahoga County is a huge partner to Jumpstart's work, but every investment we make, we're co-investing with others. So we don't have enough money. None of us have enough money to make a dramatic difference. So I'm going to try to quickly tell the Jumpstart Ventures story. Many of you probably are familiar. Big picture with Jumpstart, we're about capital, services, and connections. And yes, Jumpstart's evolved a lot in the last 19 years. In the very beginning, we were only tech companies. Today, we work with hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses in the community. We're involved in all sorts of kinds of things around entrepreneurship. But at the end of the day, if you need capital, services, and connections at the right scale as an entrepreneur to be successful. So we're really here to try to leverage those things. This is the Jumpstart Ventures team. There's 10 of us on the team. Jumpstart is 70 full-time people. So approximately 15% of the team is 100% dedicated to investing in tech companies in Ohio. There's a little, and obviously we'll share the slides, but we do have a much larger tech services team. So if you're a brand new entrepreneur and you've got an idea on a napkin, we have a whole different team at Jumpstart that's going to work, as well as partners and collaborators are going to work with a early stage entrepreneur. It's these 10 folks that are working with companies, coaching companies that are ready to raise capital. And sometimes our team will work with folks and there'll be different capital or maybe better capital for them to raise. That's fine. But most of the time, this team is focused on companies that we're preparing to invest in, and then we have almost 100 portfolio companies right now that we're working with every day. So these are the 10 folks that are very focused on that. It's been 19 years, but I am proud to say if you work at it long enough and you get a bit of little luck and hard work, is this business these things can scale. So this slide is just trying to say Jumpstart has $140 million under management across 4 different investment funds. In the first 10 years, we proudly invested $28 million. Last year, we invested in a single year just over $16 million. So one of the most frustrating things, whether you're in a brand new first-time fund or you're in other capital initiatives, the gestation period for a fund to double is typically 5 to 7 years. So if you start with a $5 million fund, you're not going to get to a $10 million fund for another 4 to 6, 7 years. You're not going to get to a $20 million fund. And when you're starting with such a small fund, if you're starting with a $50 million fund, that's not that bad because, 5 years from now, you'll have, and this is true everywhere, principally everywhere in the country. This isn't a Cleveland thing. This is just a venture capital thing. Now, there are some exceptions. If you're a multi-billionaire and you decide you want to, throw out $100 million or $200 million to start a fund, you could get going sooner, faster. But in the typical scenario for venture capital, it starts small and it grows. But so now we're at a stage where we are investing a lot more money each and every year, and over periods of time, a lot more money. So the funds, when you raise a fund, you build what's called an investment thesis, and that's what you run. You have the ability to then go out and raise money based on that thesis. So Jumpstart's first funds are what we call the ones that have been around for 18, 19 years, are our evergreen funds. Those are funds at Jumpstart that have historically wrote the first checks, or the really early checks, $250,000 to $500,000. About 8 years ago, we started a fund 100% dedicated to women and people of color called the Focus Fund. That's a $10 million fund, also very focused on early stage. And then recently, we started a fund in collaboration with university hospitals called the Healthcare Collaboration Fund. But notice, the area of our first 3 funds is really focused on companies raising $750,000 to $3 million in total. So Jumpstart's writing a check, but we're bringing every single one of our deals. We have a co-investor. We're never investing, or very rarely investing, by ourselves. About 7 years ago, we did launch our first for-profit fund. So now we're going to, theoretically, institutional investors. To the earlier points, we don't have pension funds or, typically, one of the other dynamics of our industry is if you're going to an institution, a pension fund, the smallest check they'll write is $20 million, and they'll never be more than 10% of your fund. So that means if you're raising a fund of anything less than $200 million, you don't even waste your time, because they're not going to write a check small enough. So over time, lots of pre-seed and seed, now Series A, and these are the roles and the functions. And to Todd's earlier point, growth. When a company's raising 10 to 25 million in Cleveland, in Ohio, not just Cleveland, we're a capital importer. There, other than Drive Capital, there has not been, which is based in Columbus, there hasn't been any fund large enough to lead a Series B or Series C round. So what big picture track record? We've invested in 164 companies over the last 14, 15 years, $86 million into 164 companies. Those companies have generated an exit value of over $2 billion in total, and over $200 million either cash on cash returns or on paper. What is the 86 million converted into to date at this number, which is a very conservative number, is like a 3x multiple on the invested capital. And you can see a handful of the exits here. But what about Cuyahoga County? If that's the total if 86 million is a total, what's Jumpstart done specifically in Cuyahoga County? Well, 57% of all the investments Jumpstart's made since 2004 have been in Cuyahoga County. So we've invested almost $50 million in 93 companies in Cuyahoga County. And by the way, 30 of those firms that were founded by women, 15 by women, 15 by Black or Hispanic tech entrepreneurs in Cleveland. So we've had a focus around diversity, equity, and inclusion from day one. And in 2022, I mentioned the record year, we did invest $16.3 million. In 2022, $9 million of that went into Cuyahoga County, into 18 Cuyahoga County companies. So, larger context, given this is economic development. So, Cuyahoga County, again, $49 million we've invested. We track the progress of every single company we invest in every 6 months. So, every company we provide services to and we invest in, we ask them to fill out a survey every 6 months. We just finished it for 2022. The report will be out soon, but if you say the investing activity that Jumpstart's done in Cuyahoga County in 2021 alone, the impact was $372 million to the county. And here's the breakdown: labor income, federal taxes, jobs, households supported in the county, state and local taxes in the county. And so you could very, very conservatively say over the life of Jumpstart and Jumpstart Ventures investing that the economic impact of the 50-ish million to Cuyahoga County has been $2.5 billion over the last 15 years. So now happens to be an incredible opportunity to raise more capital. And it is that opportunity because of a program called the Small State Business Credit Initiative, or the SSBCI initiative. The U.S. Treasury granted $182 million to the Ohio Department of Development a few months ago. And the ODOD is preparing to award $112 million to venture funds across Ohio. And in that construct, SSBCI, really the Ohio Department of Development, is looking for every fund that comes to make a proposal to them to be able to match. The minimum is to match the federal money now sitting at the states dollar for dollar. So Jumpstart's currently preparing right now to go raise $70 million in total, $35 million from the state of Ohio, $35 million from the mix of public-private philanthropic supporter or investors. This isn't philanthropy. This is investment, either coming to Jumpstart as a loan or coming to Jumpstart as equity, be treated like everything else. So Jumpstart is preparing to reload our 3 funds. The next fund, we're talking about launching the next 3 fund. We had next 1, next 2. Now we're talking about a next 3 fund. We're going to reload money into the Evergreen Fund. We're going to reestablish the Focus Fund, because the Focus Fund's been out of money for the last couple years, or most of its money. And then we're really excited to, if all goes as planned, we're going to launch a life sciences fund in partnership with some of the institutions in town. You know, if I was at the podium when, Jack, you asked the question to Todd about why is it that we have these 4 institutions, and the simple answer is leadership. Leaders from those institutions who want to see a disproportionate impact on the community and economic growth across the community. There are other healthcare institutions across the world, across the country, who view their activity, their investing in community activity, as a significant priority of the activity is job creation outside of their institution. We have not had that in our community. We have not had an ability to bring together the right leaders to in the public-private philanthropic space, but particularly the large institutions. And Todd's exactly right. You know, Beju and I worked on a project that basically said, you know, the largest investors in Greater Cleveland have $2.5 to $3 billion invested in venture capital across the United States, and none of it is in the Midwest. So how can we tell a story, build a story? One, understand, you know, and we certainly have done some engagement with them to understand why. And the simple answer is, well, it's a heck of a lot risk. There's a lot less risk and a lot more certainty of financial return by investing in established funds on the coast as opposed to a newer fund. I mean, that is the simple answer, and that's the logical answer. So I think the question for us, and certainly the state of Ohio has been a huge advocate, is how can we the state of Ohio is willing to put half this money into a fund if everyone else will join them. That's huge. I mean, most investors wouldn't put in more than 10 to 20% of any fund. So in this case, Jumpstart's excited because it thinks it's going to have an opportunity to raise $70 million in the next 6 months to deploy into the market. And let me also comment for Todd and Berner and anyone else, if Jumpstart's successful, there's still $70, $80 million for other people. So this isn't like, you know, you have to compete, you have to write a proposal, you have to do all these things, but there's a lot of money. And traditionally, Northeast Ohio has done a good job going to the state for these kinds of proposals in the past. So Jumpstart will do whatever we can to help other funds raise money out of this state money. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. So my last slide, at least I'm pretty sure this is my last slide. So when you think of some of the things that were talked about earlier today, of course, these young companies face a ton of risks, strategic, technical, obviously macroeconomic risks, all the things that we're wrestling with now. The best thing that we can do as an investor and as a collaboration is having more capital to support these companies a little bit longer is the smartest thing we can all do. So we are very much focused on raising more capital. Today, Jumpstart only has, it's funny to say this, or Jumpstart Ventures only has $30 million of available capital. We'll invest all that in 16 months, 18 months, because the velocity of our investing has gone up quite a bit. So we're super focused on at Jumpstart Ventures to be able to go out and raise this money. And if we are able to raise this money on the fourth or fifth bullet point, we fully believe that with the monies we have now that we're going to invest in the county and the new monies that we'll invest in the county, that startups in Cuyahoga County alone will raise $760 million in private capital in the next 5 years. And we can say that because that's our 20-year track record. We can show you when Jumpstart Ventures invests $1 million into this business on an $8 million round. I mean, it's the numbers, right? I'm not making this up. It's just literally what the history has been over the last 19 years. And the final thing, which is, if you've been at this long enough, it's kind of a fun thing to think about. So startups in Cuyahoga County just eclipsed $1 billion of follow-on funding in Jumpstart after 19 years. We think we can get to almost $800 million in 5 years if we're able to raise this $70 million, or when Jumpstart Ventures raises this $70 million later this year. So that's really what I wanted to share. Happy to take questions or give additional perspectives. This is a long-term play. Fortunately or unfortunately, we made a ton of progress. Baiju and Jack, for sure, were there at the beginning of all this 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago. I'm proud of the progress that we as a community have made. Having said that, it is incredibly frustrating that we haven't made more progress. And so I am very much honored, and our team is very appreciative of the partnership that we have with all of you. And because it does take a village. Unless, again, if we had a person or a institution, which most cities don't have, that can be the catalyst and invest, hundreds of millions of dollars, then you can do this differently. We're doing it the way most places are doing it, which is more organic.
Well, congratulations. Thank you very much for the time. Any questions from anybody on the panel?
Ray, just a quick question. So thanks for the offer to obviously support any other funds. Do you guys have a list of funds that are potentially pursuing SSBCI in kind of around the region, and how do we get behind their efforts? Beyond your support?
So typically, the simple answer is we're aware of a half a dozen or more, but we don't literally know all of them. And the reason why we don't literally know all of them is typically there's a letter of intent that's required. And so once the LOI goes in, it's public. So then you can kind of see anybody and everybody who's investing in the county. But in this process, the state decided not to do that. So there is and it used to be that if you didn't submit an LOI, you can't submit a proposal. Well, now they've eliminated both those things. So there could very well be individuals, organizations, and institutions who want to do something and are going to disproportionately or meaningfully invest in Cuyahoga County, and we don't know who they are. But Jumpstart over the last let's say 14 years, has assisted other organizations, whether it's on the capital side or on the Third Frontier Services side, of raising $200 million from the state that we've just helped others to do. So we're totally comfortable, I'm totally comfortable sitting down with anybody and helping them understand, what's it going to take to pull this off, and and also we've shared our we've written obviously a lot of these proposals over the last 18 years, and we're happy to share our proposal and what a successful proposal could look like as a template. Not that not necessarily what we write is all the right things, but it has been helpful to other funds.
Other questions? I just want to thank Ray for stepping up and being one of our spokespersons for the fund that we created here in the county, which was the Opiate Innovation Fund. We set aside, our target was 10, we got to 5, so we set aside 5, but we have commitments for the other 5 from the county to go forward if we can get matching funds.
And this is a good example. I should have said, Jack, and I've lost track of it, but the Evergreen Fund in particular, so we're going to go raise $10 million 5 from the state and 5 in match. And we are anticipating that fund and the other funds that we're raising could be sources of match or leverage for
Yeah,
that
well, the reason
fund.
why I was late was I was with the treasurer's office on this very subject, and I think there's another 10 million potentially coming from that bucket. So my target is to not be your 5, if you can't get to 50. My target is the 5 will get to 50.
Right.
Out of our fund, out of that, so to utilize the medical facilities and all that. But with that, if the 5 setting aside, because I sit on the investment advisory committee, I know the 5 is sitting there in investment advisory committee for that. Is that a match that could be?
It could be, yeah. And there's been conversations already with the Cleveland Foundation and all that. Paul started that process. The one nuance is that the money, this money is to
Thank
be
you, Bijou.
used only for tech startups. So there's other things that the Opioid Innovation Fund you might want to be used for, maybe that aren't startups. So we've got to work our way through that. But yeah, I do think there's an opportunity to double, triple, quadruple the leverage of the county's leadership.
My assumption of these, there will be a lot of startups that'll come
Oh,
out
yeah.
of
Yeah.
the Opioid Innovation Fund, out of there.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for stepping up and taking the microphone a couple months ago when we needed you. Thank you. Next, Sean?
As Sean
Is
comes up, and then
is it
we'll-
Sean or Sean?
It's Sean, but
Okay,
I
all
get
right.
seen a lot too.
Okay, well,
So as they load Sean's, let me just note, Cuyahoga County invested $350,000 through the Fund for Economic Future in supporting the work, or partly supporting the work Sean's going to talk about. Complete change of pace here, although Sean actually has personal background in the money world, but he's going to talk about talent in the hospitality industry, which is an issue we've been working on for a while.
Thank you.
I have a 3:30 meeting, so I just wanted to, not walking out because of your presentation, I just have to jump on another meeting.
and I'll stay as long as you want because I've been trying to get hospitality on our sector partnership for 3 years. Yeah. And we got it there finally. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it, and I appreciate the investment that the county's made in focusing on hospitality. I will say, one of the answers to the questions about why are your kids moving to the coasts and to Austin, Texas, is because it's fun, and that's hospitality. So that's a reason to care about hospitality. Austin was a music town, and South by Southwest was a music conference before they were tech towns and tech conferences. Same with San Francisco, Seattle. Anywhere you look, you had a good nightlife economy in addition to the incredible work that the folks who've gone before me are doing and the jobs that they're hoping to bring to town and have brought to town. So I would just answer that question with a little bit about hospitality. I think given the time, what would be most useful for this group is to just, I'll go through this first slide, give you a sense of the hospitality industry, what's happened over the last 3 years, which sets the table for what we hope to do and what the investment that the county has made so far will hope to help us do. So let's see. Forward one. Let's see. The green one? While we're pulling it up, what I'll say is defining hospitality. It's the food service and accommodation. It's the arts, entertainment, and leisure. And it may not be totally intuitive, but it is the third largest employment sector in the county. It's actually the second largest as of the second quarter of 2022. It's 9.49% of the workforce. That actually ticked up. Manufacturing ticked down slightly below that. The majority of the jobs, 80% of the jobs, are at small employers with 100 or fewer employees. And really, the vast majority are smaller than that, 50 or fewer employees. When COVID hit, well, I should say, in 2019, in the county, we were at a peak of 75,000 people employed in this sector. March 2020, that dropped to 50,000, so 25,000 out of the workforce, out of the hospitality workforce. Since then, we've recovered some. We're only up to 66,000 employed. So we are still short 9,000 workers from where we were in 2019. Since we recovered, I shouldn't say recovered, since we've gotten back from COVID, because we haven't recovered, wages are up. Wages are up almost 14% over the last 12 months in our sector, which is a good thing because those wages were too low. That's part of why people left hospitality and didn't come back. But the reality is these were low margin businesses to start with. So we are experiencing a situation from the employer side where wages are up, we're still short workers, our cost of goods are up because of inflation, and we don't have a new normal when it comes to demand. People's habits changed during COVID, and they haven't completely come back. Some places, like mine, didn't go back to 7 days a week, in part because we couldn't get the staff, in part because we didn't know about the demand levels. Others have cut hours. Others have cut service, not because they don't have demand, but because they can't deliver the product, either because they don't have the help or because they value the help that they have and they can't push them that hard to work those extra hours. So that's the environment we've been in. Bureau of Labor Statistics says over the next decade, leisure and hospitality will be the largest sector employment growth. So over the next decade, they're anticipating 1.3% growth annually. What this means is we have jobs we haven't filled. We have a bunch of small employers who are putting all of their efforts into staying afloat, so they can't put their efforts into organizing amongst themselves. They're relying on trade organizations that really operate more at the state and the national and the federal level for advocacy. But most of those businesses have their interaction with government here locally. The licenses, assessments, permits, code enforcement, inspections, law enforcement. What we are missing is a way to connect the employees and the employers with the things they need. From both the employees and the employers, there is a need for training. What we're doing, and it's too bad Beju had to leave early because we're working with Greater Cleveland Partnership and the Registered Apprenticeship Hub to catalog all the existing hospitality training programs in the region so that we can more effectively connect those programs with the existing employers. And the investment in the Registered Apprenticeship Hub and in that aspect of training is trying to talk to the employers and understand what exactly do you need so that we're training for those skills. Because a lot of the programs that exist are 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, or on the other end, ServSafe certification, which really isn't a lot of training. So that's a big component. Something else we're looking at is this is not the only sector that has low-wage workers, but there are a lot of low-wage workers. The county, the region already has a lot of supports for lower-wage workers, but connecting those individuals with those services is something that could be done much more effectively. So what we're looking at there, whether it's with the county or whether it's with United Way 211, is looking at a client relationship model to help the employers and the employees connect their employees to the services that they're eligible for. One of the slides you didn't see is the hospitality sector is made up of a higher percentage of women, Black, Latino, those without a college degree, those with kids in the home, than other parts of the employment sectors in the county. Those workers also rely on SNAP benefits and Medicaid more than other sectors. So to the extent that we have these low-wage jobs until that situation changes, what we can do is work to improve the quality of life of the people who work in that sector, and a client relationship manager to make that work is one of the recommendations we're making. I will stop there because I see we're at time, and I will ask that you invite us back, in part because when you do, My colleague who I didn't introduce, Dr. Christian Nasaya from Baldwin Wallace, is doing more in-depth economic impact research on the hospitality and leisure sector in both the county and the MSA. So we will be able to provide even better and more updated information on that, and would welcome the opportunity to come back and talk about hospitality more and how it fits in the overall picture. Thank you.
Well, because, Sean, you come here with taking time away from your other life, if there's questions that anybody has, Will, Mr. Mayor, anybody have something? I think it's only
Just a
fair to you.
Quickie here. I agree with your thesis that hospitality is related to driving other parts of the economy in you know, places like Seattle and Austin. But I don't know how we kickstart, you know, how do we go from a place that I know I have two boys in their mid-20s, they don't want to move back here. But how do we become a place where young people do want to, you know, become Austin?
Yeah.
And you know, I was just there over the weekend, flew back, and my reaction was, well, I don't want to live here at 61 years old, but that doesn't matter. You know, all the younger people who are there, they do, and that's what matters.
That's a great question, and to your point, you move from Manhattan to New Jersey. People will want to be where the action is until they don't want to be where the action is, but they're going to be in that same general vicinity. I would say we have a tremendous opportunity, because if you look at the Austins, the Seattles, the San Franciscos, they are losing the musicians and the hospitality work staff and the businesses in that part of the sector at a much greater rate than we are in Cleveland, because of the real estate prices and cost of living. And we have a real opportunity with the affordable real estate we have here now to make the investment in supporting those businesses to make sure they don't go away, because we're not out of the woods on COVID. I saw Platform closed this morning over on Lorraine. We're losing restaurants weekly. We're losing music businesses. But also affordable housing for those working in hospitality and in the arts, the creatives, will position us to plan for the success of the other economic development efforts. We're really well positioned to make that investment now while it's cheap. These other cities are trying to make that investment. Seattle has created a cultural space agency, which raised $17 million to buy 4 properties. If I had $17 million, if we had $17 million in Northeast Ohio, the number of places that we could preserve is a lot more than 4. I'll say that. So I hope that answers some of your question. It's a broader topic in terms of how do we make Cleveland more attractive than Austin, but it's an affordable place for creatives to move, and if we give them an opportunity to grow and stay here, we'll be a place where they move from. Or move to, I should say.
To me, Austin's not that great. It just has a lot of young people, which attracts a lot of young people. So it's sort of like, how do you create that, you know, that agglomeration?
Yeah.
So you mentioned the universities, you know, playing a role. Any chance to get the, even going further to the high schools, especially kids that don't, you know, necessarily go to college, they don't have to spend 4 years racking up debt, and maybe get some good opportunities?
Absolutely, and one of the training programs that is one of the key is the one at Cleveland City Schools. So that is one of the programs, and that's just in culinary hospitality. There are other, because hospitality is broader and includes arts, entertainment, and leisure. There is a great group called Cinema City 216 that is working with Cleveland City school kids, mostly black and brown youth, to get them the skills they need to work in the commercial film industry, because Marvel has shot here. Marvel is coming back with Blade. That's an increasing set of opportunities, and those jobs as best boys and grips and carpenters, pay really well. So, so there is effort there, but we do need, I think what we need is that connection between the employers and the training providers and those training providers who are working with younger high school age kids to really understand what do you need and how can we work on the job placement right from the get-go instead of creating these programs hoping that people will fill these positions.
3 real quickies. My office is in Collinwood, and the people buying land in Collinwood, to your point, Sean, are buying it from all over the world because they can see the arts community at Collinwood is going to be the next explosion within Northeastern Ohio. Mike Polensik, the councilman from there, can't believe people are buying land from Saudi Arabia, from all over. I mean, it would shock, I'd be willing to bet it's got a bigger demographic than Austin does as to who's buying the land right now in that area as far as from that. So it tells me that somebody knows something about buying land cheap in what's going to be an entertainment area. The other one was, I am on Playhouse Squares board, and we are outselling, that's completely sold out. I mean, as far as we've sold more 3-week seats than any place in the country. So that's already come back. So your hospitality is only right behind it. And if you're watching the tax dollars, the motion picture film credit, they're also trying to get the theater credit to be a parallel. So it could be theoretically the AAA League of baseball that the shows would get launched here and then go to New York City. So we've got some jewels of things that are taking place. And then the last one I'll only mention, only because I've been involved with the sector partnership for the manufacturing. We were working with Chick-fil-A, hospitality, to transfer a Chick-fil-A job into a manufacturing job. So that becomes a career transfer. A year and a half at Chick-fil-A, you get the golden ticket, and any manufacturer will hire you at $25 an hour. And so it becomes a career path, not just a hospitality path. And so I throw that out there only as a different way of looking at your model. When you start saying that, let's join with Lincoln Electric. Let's join with, because I guarantee you, the only thing they're looking for now is, did you show up for work for the last year and a half? They don't care about anything else. Everything else, as your point on that, Todd, is secondary.
If I can just respond to a couple of those things, that is a great career track. There's also, when we talk to folks who are in the hospitality industry, there are people who genuinely like the hospitality.
I'm not trying, yeah, they should stay there. Yeah.
And hospitality is not part of the sector partnership in the Workforce Funders Group because we don't have a central partner to be that. So that's part of what we're recommending is there needs to be a central partner that pulls these small businesses together. And as far as Collinwood goes, I would tell you that the music incubator that Cleveland Rocks, that Cindy Barber has started, there are models of these in other cities. One of the Koch brothers kids in Wichita has invested over $1 million in the Wichita Music Incubator. There's an understanding that these types of music incubators are economic drivers and cultural drivers. And in a place like Collinwood that has these assets, like the old Slovenian home, in addition to the beachland.
Careful with that old word, okay?
Noted. But these are assets that don't exist that don't still exist in these other primary markets. But it's the secondary and tertiary markets where these spaces exist and where a lot of this work can be launched. And the investment in that is low dollar compared to trying to do it somewhere else and compared to the overall return you get in terms of making it a place where people want to be, where young people want to be. There was a third point, but I forgot it. So I'll wrap there.
The third point was the dollar money going for the film credit. The film credit from the state of Ohio has always been chasing the film credit. Playhouse Square would like to have a share at the seat of the table because of the
And I would say the third,
theater.
the third leg in that stool, and Ken Smith has proposed this at the state level, is a recording tax credit for music. So if we can be a theater, music, and film mecca, AAA for those primary markets in all three of those, that's a great cluster. That's a great cluster to build around.
And thank you, Sean. I think you got your 15 minutes, actually. And thank you, everybody. And I appreciate you staying around for another 10 minutes. We're going to pass along, we're going to skip the rest of the agenda. Sorry, Paul. And we'll pick it up at another time. Thank you very much for coming. And this is hard work, making jobs. Thanks.
Thanks very much to all the guests that came. Much appreciated.
Yeah.